time and the season, it's almost here, and the signs and the reasons are very clear. The fulfillment of scripture is coming true, and we're expectantly waiting, the time is due. There's a change that is brewing, an urgent call. It's the same kind of feeling before you fall. It's a sense, it's an instinct, an inner voice. It's a test, are you listening? Have you made your choice? There's a crossroad coming, do you know your path? Are you lost and running? Do you fear the wrath? Don't you feel all the heaviness in the air? If it's real, are you ready? Is your soul prepared? There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. Is your family equipped if the time has come? Would you have what you need or be scared and run? No matter where you are, no matter what you believe, there's a change that is coming, to that we agree. It's like we all seem to know that there's not much time before we reach the tipping point and we cross the line. We got one foot in the chasm of this growing crack. We're at the edge of the cliff and there's no turning back. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. With the labor pains growing, you can count the days. So many earthquakes, tornadoes, and tidal waves. It's the eve of destruction, the harvest here. It's the reaping, but we will not live in fear. For our time of redemption is coming soon. By divine intervention, we'll see the truth arriving live and direct for all to view. If you haven't read the Bible, I pray you do. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. It's like time speeding up and it seems so fast. And while a month slips by, a year has passed. You hear the same kind of feeling all over the globe. Not sure just what it's revealing, but you're not alone. The same dreams that you're dreaming are all repeating. It seems that while we are sleeping, we're given meanings. And when it all goes down, there will be no doubt. From the east to the west, to the north and south, there's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs. There's a big thing coming and there's not much time. It's all been written by God's design. There's a plan and a purpose, it's all divine. If you're awake and you heard this, you know the signs.
All right, so you have me right now, and I'm gonna, oh, that is going right in front of my face. I'm so glad I can fix that to get out from in front of my face, the chat there. And so I'm gonna be calling up our good friend Gary Wayne right now. And I hope you have questions ready. Little song. Hello.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Excellent. I can hear you very, very clearly, and the picture is good.
Great.
So at least mine is. I can't see yours, but you told me that would be the case. So
yes.
I guess we're good.
It feels kind of unfair probably because I can see you and you can't see me. But just everyone will let you know in the chat that they can see me and they can see you. So I played.
I'll just try and look at my picture so I don't have a wandering face. So
yeah, I know it's really weird when you have to watch yourself. In fact, I kind of like this that I don't have to watch myself at all. So I played a song right before this by a group that I really love, and they are called Destiny Lab, and it talks about the signs, knowing the signs, and I thought it was just so perfect for what we've been talking about, of knowing the signs of what's to come and seeing these kinds of things. I'm not saying that everybody has to ask questions specific to that, because your book is got so many good subjects in it, and you don't just study what the book is about. So I know that some people will have brought questions, and I'm going to let everybody know that they can just start asking questions. If it moves too fast, which luckily usually my chat doesn't, then I can always scroll back up and look. And if you really want, you can send super chat with questions, and I'll definitely see it. So there's always that option too, but certainly not necessary at all, because we know that YouTube takes a big chunk of the super chats. So anyway, did you want to start on any particular subject before we ask questions?
Nope, just let's just get right into it. I mean, I'm sure people have questions on the show that we did earlier this week, and I'm sure they got lots of other questions.
I have one question to start off with, because I saw it today in one of my group chats, and people were kind of discussing if America is Atlantis. Have you heard that?
I have, so yes, we can talk about that.
I don't know anything about why people think that.
Well, I'll explain when you ask me the question. So,
oh, that's the question.
I think you'll find. Are we on right now?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, we're live.
Oh.
So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. People are saying hi.
I should stop. I should stop goofing around then.
I guess I should be a little bit more clear, but you haven't done anything that isn't worth seeing live, so I wouldn't worry about that. But I am currently asking you right now. Okay, so everybody, this is Gary Wayne. I'm sorry. I did such a good job introducing when I was ready to go and record, and I did a very poor job, so that's on me, and I apologize.
No worries. So Atlantis is America Atlantis, and you do have a little bit of iconology in terms of Atlantis, in terms of the city of Atlanta, and a few other things. I won't bore people with that kind of detail, but when they talk about Atlantis, they're talking about New Atlantis, and it's the arising of the Atlantis. And I think we might have covered this off in the show on Monday. Atlantis was the helm of world government before the flood. And it was a time when the gods and humans interacted, and these were obviously the rebellious angels, and Poseidon being the angel who is the angel of the ocean. He has a female wife and creates through Clydo 10 offspring Nephilim, Atlas being the most famous, and they're going to try and take over the whole world. And it's important to understand that sort of backdrop before I get directly into the question. And when we roll that forward and we roll it into the 1600s and late 1500s, and we understand this is the rise of the modern secret society, so it's after the fall of the Templars, we have an interesting individual comes along named Francis Bacon, who's a Rosicrucian. And of course, he's the same one that has a heavy influence on the English language, the writing of the King James Bible. He was, the right-hand person for both Queen Elizabeth and King James, and one of the more influential people, not only in terms of the politics, but for the promotion and the establishment of exploring the New World. And they know about the continent across the ocean already, but they want to create the new Atlantis. And of course, that's the book that Francis Bacon writes about, which is the new Atlantis. And the new Atlantis is the new age. It is the age of the Fourth Reich, as some people might call it. It is the counterfeit millennium that Antichrist is going to offer. And it's allegorically called Atlantis. And from an imagery perspective, in terms of understanding the 10 kings, this is what is talked about in Revelation 13 and Revelation 17, and in Daniel 2, and in Daniel 7, and in Daniel 8. So these are the 10 kings, the 10 horns, the 10 empires of the end time that will permit and hand their power over to Antichrist, who comes to power at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And in this new Atlantis, Francis Bacon is giving a picture of a religion, which is the religion of theosophy, that's created by the Gnostics or it extends out of the Gnostics and created by the Rosicrucians. And understand that I said Francis Bacon was a Rosicrucian. And this is the religion that is going to be the religion that harmonizes and brings together religion and science in the end time. So it's the Babylon religion that he's envisioning here, and it's going to work in tandem with science. And what's important to know about that is the Royal Society that's created by Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians in 1660 with a formal charter by King Charles in 1662 that permits the start of the Royal Society, which is the origination of modern science and education outside the church. That literally changed everything going forward in terms of its influence on teaching people. And it's that science that still answers to the wizards behind the curtain, so to speak, to use a Wizard of Oz allegory, who's pulling the strings of science even to this day. So everybody needs to understand that. So he's the individual that has dreamed up this new Atlantis. He's going to have his picture hung in the entrance of the Royal Society as the inspirational founder. And what he's talking about through what he is doing in terms of the Royal Society, inspirational and writing of the New Atlantis book, and funding and promoting the exploration of the Americas, is that he views the continents yet to be discovered that he knows about will be the platform to bring about the new Atlantis. It's going to be the mechanism. They're going to build some great nations. And of course, there's more than one nation in the beginning. That's sort of imagined. Brazil would have been the other one. But it's America that takes root and becomes the platform and the archetype and the model for establishing world government and leading to the new Atlantis and setting up a similar sort of ideology and organizational structure. So in the United States, you have one strong central government, and you have all of these individual states. And this is sort of the idea that they have for world government. Now, in this case, with the new Atlantis, there will be 10 of those empires, and then that leader will rule over several individual states within it, but each will send a representative or a king for the council for the church for the world government. So when people talk about Atlantis and the new Atlantis in terms of what the United States was established for, that's kind of what they're getting at. So, kind of a long story to get there, but I wanted to give enough background so that people understand the allegories and why the golden age of angels and Nephilim is what they're trying to bring back, and why you have that modern day understanding, its ancient history, and the future that's to come about with the 10 kings and empires of the end time world government.
So, for anyone sitting there watching me, I look like I'm doing a lot of other things, but my mom can't get the live chat to work, and she was watching the other day. So my dad texted, so I was answering to see if she had a question, and I'm also writing down some of the questions here. So, oops, sorry, I just touched the mic, guys. Sorry if I just scratched your ears. Samuel Peterson asked, "Are the false gods watchers?" And he didn't specify what he meant by false gods, but Samuel Peterson is asking, are the false gods watchers? I'm sure you could answer that.
Well, some of them are. And certainly when we look at that term watchers, most people know that as coming out of First Enoch. And these are the watchers that go to the human females to create the Nephilim. We do get watchers that are mentioned in the Bible, and that's in Daniel 4, and it's mentioned 3 times in Daniel 4. And they're representatives of God and instituting and advising and establishing the government. So we understand then that the watchers, who I think are the seraphim angels, in this case, that's being talked about in Genesis 6 and in Enoch, which are one of the 3 groups of the watchers, those who are awake and watchful around the throne, are the ones that were governing the antediluvian age. But there was more than just watchers that are part of the governing hierarchy. there's several different layers to the hierarchy, and people might be familiar with terms like powers and the mighties or the virtues. These are all part of a whole hierarchy of gods that work in this organizational structure that counterfeits the organizational structure in heaven, because everything that the rebellious angels do is a counterfeit. So understand that they're going to counterfeit the gods that rule the earth, and understand that Satan is the prince of this earth and the god of this earth, and so establishes himself as the god of the earth in replacement and a counterfeit of the god of heaven. And then they'll take that organizational structure down into human implementation, which will model the fallen angel hierarchy. So the reason why I say there's more is because the New Testament provides us with a lot more names, and I've got documents on this if people want to get a hold of me through my website at thegenesis6conspiracy.com. Ask for the hierarchy of angels, and I've got a series of documents on there, and I'll walk you through it. But these are the angels that are also referred to in Psalm 82, which is the council of gods. And so we know that there's this council, and we know that Satan is the head of that council as the god of this earth. And before the flood and after the flood, you may have, and likely do have, and I would say we definitely have, a different council of gods, because a lot of the gods before the flood were sent to the abyss for their crimes, in particular the impassioned ones. So Azazel would be the host of the angelic realm of watchers that rebelled, that is sent along with his host, and host is a term for angels, just as sons of God are and stars are. And again, I got a great handout on that if people want to know how angels and the sons of God and the host of heaven are all connected. They're all have interchangeable in terms of the terms that they're used and how they're used in the Old Testament. So again, I can provide that for you. But to make the short story a little bit short, you have the angels that rebelled, that were impassioned, that were put into the abyss. They are no longer able to govern the earth because they're in the abyss. So they would have been replaced after the flood by different gods, and we're not told whether or not they're, what mix of the angelic realm that there is, because there's many different types of angels, as what I've talked about, including the Ophanim. If people don't know what the Ophanim are, those are the ones that are like a cherubim, as Ezekiel talks about when he's within the chariot and the throne of heaven. They have a little bit different look as they're described than the cherubim are. And when you take wheel back to Hebrew, it's the word ophan, put the male I-am plural on it, you get ophanim. That's the third group that are described within the wheels. And that's all part of that series I can provide you in terms of the hierarchy of the angels. And we get the number 70 for the most part from Deuteronomy 28, where it talks about the sons of Israel that are born in Egypt. You get the number of nations that are dispersed after Babel. Those are 70, and those are the same number that were of the gods in the antediluvian epoch as Deuteronomy, I'm sorry if I said 20, I think Deuteronomy 32 describes. And so you get that number of 70 as being at the upper end of that council of God. So one presumes you had that number 70 before, and whether or not the seven watchers that are typically talked about in First Enoch are ruling over tens, which would give the number as 70. I can't make a biblical connection on that, but I suspect there might be something to the number 7 in terms of the counterfeit. I understand there's 7 angels, archangels before God, like Michael, for example, and it's talked about in Revelation. So I think there's probably a relationship there. I just can't quite connect that final dot. But certainly the watchers were a significant part of the antediluvian government, just as seraphim watchers that aren't in the abyss, that have rebelled, would be part of that organizational governing structure after the flood and would be at the top of the order for that order of governance for church and state. And then I would say that the army is going to fall under the archangel in a different pillar. But you have basically three pillars, and they're all kind of modeled in the same way with the same terms. So you have the model of government, king, queen, or replaced and answering in from behind the scenes to the king and queen of secular governments like the modern democracies that we have today, plus the church government. And they're all set up in a very, very similar manner, just as the Army has a very, very similar type of organizational structure, all of which was placed in the antediluvian epoch, which was the archetype for the post-diluvian government that we have even to this day.
Oh my gosh. I can't take notes because I got to write down questions. I tried to, but I can't. So Rockman asks, do you see overlapping interests of secret societies and why? And I don't know if it's, I'm sure he won't mind if I add to it. Have you seen them? Obviously, like the elites also disagree, maybe. But he's asking about overlapping interests of secret societies and why.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's asking in terms of overlapping. So let me talk about secret societies. There's a hierarchical structure of secret societies. So if that's where we're talking about overlap, then definitely there's overlap, but they all report up this hierarchical structure. So just to do a quick sort of root or tree trunk of that structure, you're going to have Freemasonry kind of at the lower level. And in Freemasonry, you become an adept at either the third degree of the York Rite or 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, which is just split 11 times. So it's the same process, just they count the degrees a little bit different, but by the time you get the 33rd degree, it's the same thing as third degree in the old ancient system, which the York Rite is based on. And so they're the first adepts, and above them are the Illuminati. They're the illuminated adepts. And of course, they have a little bit different agenda than Freemasons. So the Freemasons would oversee organizations like politicians and the military. And some think more of the media today, although there could be a crossover of the Rosicrucians with that. The Illuminati is focused on world government and destroying Christianity. That's their main goals. As you move up that ladder and you're rising in degrees above the third degree level and oversee several lodges within the Masonic organization, you're going to have to be fifth degree. And again, I'm counting in the old rites, which would be higher than 33 degree, obviously, of the Scottish Rite. I don't know how many degrees they are. Some people say 9. I've heard as high as 12 or 13. I can't really get any information beyond 9. And you've got a pureblood issue that I'm going to get to here in a second. And so as you move up into the Rosicrucians, you have 50% of that level being brought up through the lower ranks of the secret societies, and the top 50% are the purebloods. These are the descendants of the Nephilim, and they make up the 50% portion. And above them, you're going to have the Committee of 300, which is all purebloods. And then above that, you're going to have the Council of 33, and then you're going to have the 13 families. These are all purebloods. And then as you have intersecting as sort of branches, more like I would say a evergreen where the branches point a little bit more downwards because of how that hierarchical structure is set up. You've got other societies and groups that are intersecting all the way up. So the Masons are going to run and be involved in a lot of the lower level secret societies that may even just seem more just social than anything, that are in the local communities. As you move up, you're going to have, let's say the Club of Rome is going to report into either the top level of the Rosicrucian or into the Committee of 300, because the Club of 300, the Club of Rome is made up of purebloods, and they also have set the world up in a fashion for the end time that will have 10 trading blocks, spheres of influence, empires, whatever you want to call them, but they're going to make up those 10. And again, you see how they're all working towards the same agenda to fulfill the new Atlantis that it matches up with Daniel and Revelation talks about. You have the Bilderbergers that are also made up of purebloods, but there's also a lower level of Bilderbergers. So you have new money, let's say like Bill Gates or Bill Clinton or all these other people that you see going over to this once a year meeting where they get their marching orders from the purebloods. So there's a higher order of Bilderbergers, and those are all royal bloodlines. You've got all sorts of other royal bloodline orders that are feeding in to the Rosicrucians and up in all sorts of royal bloodline orders. One would be to give a classic example would be the Knights of the Seraphim, which is the Norse royal bloodline order. But there are several of these kinds of orders that are just for the main line families and their older sons that would be running them. So you've got the Jesuits that would also be reporting into this organizational structure as well. And again, will be reporting into the Rosicrucian level because it's the Rosicrucians, and I know a lot of people disagree with this. Again, I've got a great documented 3 or 4 part series on the Jesuits. I'll show you how it comes about and why they were set up to establish the new Babylon within the church, which was the Templar dream. And of course, they were a Gnostic secret society order that funded all of these modern societies and were replaced by a decentralized form after the Templars' fall because they didn't want to have all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. So the Jesuits also report in there, and they're doing the beckoning of the secret societies within the Roman Church to prepare that for the Babylon, which is the religion of the Rosicrucians that I talked about previously, Theosophy, which is going to be the religion that unites science and religion in the end time because they're the ones that are controlling religion already today. And the Jesuits were already the ones who were controlling teaching in the church, and they got control of the banking, which is another rabbit hole I won't go into, but it's all about controlling the complete banking system as one of the other reasons the Jesuits are set up the banking system within the Roman Church in this case, and of course the Rothschilds, who are set up by the Rosicrucians after the fall of the Templars to reestablish that banking system that the Knights Templar had. And if people aren't aware of it, the Knights Templar were the most powerful organization of the time and actually created modern banking. And they were the controllers of the banking system while they were in power. And one of the reasons why they were taken down. So hopefully I've given enough information there to sort of give you an idea in terms of how secret societies might overlap, but they're all working towards the same agenda. They all have different objectives that they're assigned. They do compete at times, and they do have some, pushing back of each other and jostling around, but directionally, they're all working in the same direction, just as all the bloodlines are working in the same direction, even though they might have some dust-ups as well, because you might want to appreciate the fact that even though there are ennobled royal bloodlines and they've got the genealogies to back that up, there can only be one Antichrist. So, and there can only be 10 that are going to run, the 10 empires before Antichrist. So there's only so many family bloodlines that are going to be amongst the 10, and then only one who will be destined in their way of thinking and what they're trying to bring about, the one who sets up this royal dynasty that's going to rule the earth in the new Atlantis in the counterfeit millennium.
I sometimes wonder if the elites don't fight, though, when you look at people like Donald Trump and how things are going on.
Absolutely. They fight all the time.
Yeah.
And a good example, and he would be an example of being pushed out of the mainstream of it, and he fights back. So, although I like a lot of things that President Trump does, he is still moving things, maybe not as fast, but he's still moving things forward for the end time and in globalization, even though he's not moving the way those globalists that have most control would like him to see. What he's looking for is for the United States to have a larger role in that 10.
So
as
Ben's,
opposed to a lesser
sorry.
role. And I would compare it to more like what Putin is doing, as being another sort of strong man and less pure bloodlines. And I've got a document on Putin if people want to get a hold of me about Putin and his bloodlines. And he is looking for a bigger role than what he would have been assigned, let's say, by the purebloods of the West. And of course, there's bloodlines all around the world, so there's going to be dust-ups all the time.
So Ben Schwagel did send a super chat, but not necessarily a question, but I want to read it because thank you for that, Ben's. It also looks like the fallen angels built a bunch of temples here, possibly before the flood as well, and our leadership is using them as capitals.
Well, it's an interesting point. I'm not sure which capitals you could actually go out and prove were built on an ancient megalithic site or an ancient temple, unless you did a very thorough excavation underneath. But what I do know is when let's take the U.S. government and Washington City. I mean, that is set up with sacred geometry and pentagrams and all sorts of different things that are built into the outlay of the city. You've got, this Greek-style dome structure and pillars, which is classic Greek and Egyptian. I'll mix in Egyptian because of the column that is also set up in Washington. And they tend to locate those government sites if they have a chance to plan it, or a church, let's say the Gothic cathedrals, on ancient temple sites and ley lines and a whole bunch of other things and astronomical alignments. So they spend a lot of time to get that right because it's part of that polytheist religion. So one would expect that they would have done that because that's been their MO throughout history. I would also say that, I think we have sites in North America and South America that were built either by fallen angels or certainly built before the flood by descendants of Cain, who and again, referring back to the first show, if people haven't seen it, who would have intermarried with and lived amongst and been ruled over by the Nephilim after the sixth generation or in the days of Noah until the flood comes. And they built all sorts of great megaliths and structures based on the technology that they had developed, which was the 7 liberal sciences, which is another connection back to the sciences that were instituted by the Royal Society in 1660 that I talked about earlier. And it's the same liberal sciences that we have today, which is why, again, you have all that same type of polytheist architectural structure and Masonic structure that is all across on the universities, because it's all part of that system, and why you get degrees and a whole bunch of other things that I won't go down now. But if you really take a critical step back and look at how those things are set up, it's just modeling everything that was done before, and it's all based on the polytheist degree system. So it doesn't surprise me, though, that we have things like the Aztec pyramids or the serpent ruins that all go all through the Midwest. And whether or not it's the serpentine hills or it's these pyramids that have a mathematical relationship that is astonishing with the pyramids in Egypt, this is built with the technology we don't have. And why there isn't erosion on the serpent mounds, nobody can explain. There's a technology in there that isn't explained. So there was megaliths and things built here probably by the fallen angels, and some by the Cainites, and maybe even as some of the corrupted Adamites as you get closer to the flood. But what is consistent in most polytheist cultures around the world is that these extraordinary structures like pyramids and cities, let's say like Machu Picchu down in Peru, would have been built by the gods, and that's what they say. And same with the cities that were built, with the Quiché Maya and the Aztecs. Having said that, the Masons believe that The knowledge that Enoch, son of Cain, developed as opposed to Enoch, son of Jared, that married with the fallen angels in that sixth generation that I talked about, is the technology that was able to build these great megaliths to memorialize this great civilization that was going to be destroyed by the flood, so that there would be this permanent record, even after the flood waters receded. So hopefully I've covered that off in enough detail. I'm not sure that that was the question, but I think that's what they were getting at in terms of building on ancient fallen angel sites.
I also wondered, and I'm not asking a question, I'm just going to say, I've also wondered about, I think it was your book, it had to be, because I'm not really reading any other book, but it could have been something I heard in a video about Orion, and that being Azazel hanging in the sky. And that would be another indication as to why they would create the pyramids to match Orion in different locations.
That exact alignment, yes. And that comes out of the occult. So all of the sources, it comes out of their occult dictionary. Again, I've got the sources for that if people want to get back to me, and it's also part of Jewish legend, as I recall. So we don't get anything out of Enoch on that. We don't get anything out of the Bible on that, but certainly the polytheists believe that.
So Ted Flanders asks, what trumpet number are we in now?
Well, we're not in a trumpet right now, in my estimation, and I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, and we're not in the seal openings yet. So I have a linear understanding in terms of prophecy and how the Bible is written, and that includes Revelations. And so when you look at the seal judgments and the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments, you have identical kinds of catastrophes, but with different intensities. So with the seals, you have 25%. With the trumpets, it's 33%. With the bowls, it would be 100%. Except that Jesus steps in, as Matthew talks about, so that the whole world isn't destroyed. These are the birth pangs. And we're just in the start of the birth pangs of the fig tree generation now. And again, that includes, pestilences and earthquakes and wars and famine and things like that. And those are the beginning of sorrows. Those are the beginning of birth pangs. And those are the terms that are used for these kinds of disasters in the Old Testament that Jesus is referencing. And a birth pang, as most people know, they get stronger with more intensity and happen more quickly the closer you get to the birth or the end of the age or the birth of the millennium. And so they will increase intensity. So we're not even at the opening of the seals, which would be very, very close to either just before or just after the signing of the covenant in Daniel 9:27 that starts the last 7 years. And the reason, I'll give one quick reason for why I'm saying this, other than it makes sense in terms of how I approach prophecy. You can't get ahead of the events. You can't get ahead of the chronology. So to start the last 7 years, and the trumpets would happen after the seals, and the trumpets take you up to the midpoint of the last 7 years. And that's why you have the bull wrath after there, and that's why Revelation 14 gives you that quick summary of what's going to happen after the seventh trumpet, and then you get the details after that. But what's important to understand is before you can have the start of those last 7 years, you have to have a universal religion in place. Mm-hmm. And you have to have that in place so that the people of Israel can start the sacrifice on a wing or an extremity of the temple. That takes place until the midpoint of the last 7 years. And we don't have a world government in place because it takes the universal religion that is going to sponsor the world government, and that's why she rides the empires in Revelation as it's recorded in its imagery. So the quick answer is we're not in the last 7 years, and I know a lot of people think that all of the seals and the trumpets and The bowl judgments are all the same. That would be a very redundant way of writing the Bible, but I understand that's another way of looking at it. But when I look at my primary base for how I establish the chronology for prophecy is I put all prophecy around what Jesus said first, not vice versa. And Jesus gives you the chronology in Matthew 24 and the main events, and it's repeated in Mark 13, and you get a couple more details, and then Luke 17 and Luke 21 will add a few more details. And so I tend to add those extra details in Mark and Luke onto what Matthew has, and then it's very easy to apply all the other prophecies around what Jesus said. Everything just starts to fall in order.
I think that's a perfect answer for me. Samuel Peterson, do you think the Tower of Babel could be the all-seeing eye? And was Nimrod involved with antediluvian Freemasonry?
Well, Nimrod wasn't involved with antediluvian Freemasonry because he is born after the flood. So, but he is definitely born with post-diluvian or post-flood Masonry. And according to the Masons, and this is their history from their Polychronicon, is a fellow by the name of Hermes discovers the two pillars of Lamech, and in some of the Polychronicon legends, you have the pillars of Enoch, but they're talking about the same pillars. Lamech is a descendant of Enoch, and Lamech starts a renaissance of Enoch's knowledge of the seven liberal arts in his generation, and that's why Tubal Cain, Nama, Jubal, and Jubal are mentioned. And Jubal is the one who is doing a renaissance of Masonry, and all of these are extraordinary patriarchs within Freemasonry, and more accurately, the ancient Masonic organization. And so Hermes finds these two pillars because they know about the flood, and they want to make sure that the knowledge is going to survive and the religion is going to survive. And it's Enoch who creates mysticism before the flood that creates the secret societies and the mystical religion to house this knowledge that we're talking about, and so it doesn't get into the wrong hands, i.e. the poor. And they're going to use it to honor the pantheon of gods, and they're going to use it to not give God credit for anything and to lead people away from God and to create structures to honor their pantheon of gods. And so after the flood, Hermes finds these two pillars, and he's led with the directions on the pillars to the bank of ancient knowledge that they say was stored in 36,525 books in 9 vaults stacked underneath the pyramids. And he brings this knowledge back to Nimrod, who partners with Nimrod. So you have a false prophet individual and an antichrist archetype in the Masonic account that is going to provide the knowledge to build Babel City and to build Babel Tower. And according to their information, Nimrod initiates 1,000 Masons to do this building, reignites the development of the 7 sacred sciences, and writes the first constitution, and is considered the first Grand Master of Masonry after the flood. We get a hint of this knowledge in the Genesis 10 account, where God says, working as one people with one language, nothing they want to do will be prevented them from doing so, to paraphrase it. And so I think this is a reflection of that knowledge, however it comes about, and however they all of a sudden have this knowledge to build this ziggurat, which is the same ideology as a pyramid in the ancient world. So you have this ziggurat that's being built with knowledge that isn't really explained. And they're going to build it into the sky and into the heavens. And so Nimrod can actually go into heaven, according to polytheist accounts, and kill God if God steps out of line again or tries to bring about another flood. Well, that's really kind of interesting when you start wondering, well, where did that information come from? Because it's not likely that Noah would have taught his sons the knowledge that destroyed the world less than 100 years before that. It just makes no sense. And we get no account of Noah establishing these sciences after the flood. But we do know that the knowledge comes from somewhere. So what was at the Tower of Babel? We don't know. The all-seeing eye is recognized in occult accounts as being an allegory for Satan. The omnipresence of Satan is also allegorized as the third eye, which gets you into the conscious level of communicating with the fallen angels and the demons, and again, a whole sort of theology behind that and polytheism. So I don't know whether or not the top of Babel will have an all-seeing eye or not, or it had one in the all-seeing eye or not. I don't have anything that I've researched that would identify it. But what I would say, one thing about Babel is it has two different translations. One is the standard Hebrew translation of confusion of languages, because God confuses the languages after Babel. Well, it's interesting because Nimrod stays in Shinar, which is a transliteration for Sumer, after Babel, and he develops the Magi, or the wise men that are developing this knowledge. And again, you get some consistency with the Bible and the continuation of this knowledge with the Magi and Nimrod. And Nimrod develops a number of nations, or fathers a number of nations while still in Mesopotamia. The Akkadians are one of them, which are going to produce the Assyrians down the road. And the Akkadians have a translation for Babel, and this would be the language that likely descends from Nimrod, and because all the languages are changed, and he is the father of these people. So Babel, in the Akkadian language that likely comes from Nimrod, is translated as Bab, as gateway, and El or El as God or angel. And it's thought that that would be a gateway to the gods. So a lot of people then sort of say, okay, is it possible that Nimrod was trying to create something that could get into another dimension and unlock the abyss and free all of the angels that were locked in the abyss for their crimes before the flood? Certainly a possibility.
I think that makes more sense than just building a physical building to the sky. So thanks again to Benz for sending a super chat, and to Net Booth right after that. So I'm going to do hers first, because a lot of people are continuing to ask this question after she asked it, and then we'll go back to Benz's question. So Tanette says, what are pre-Adamites, or what do you think about pre-Adamites? What do you think about these characters? And what people are asking in the chat is, what are they?
What is a pre-Adamite? Well, there's a lot of different theories that people promote. So let's start with a generic term. So pre-Adamite would be a human or a humanoid, or whether it's Neanderthal or others that are around before the creation of Adam in Genesis 2. And I would say, for me, what a pre-Adamite is, I would narrow down the list of possibilities down to a species that is the same as Adam that's talked about in Genesis 2. So the day 6 people, because Adam is the same word for the humans that are used, as you take that back to Hebrew in Genesis 1, all goes back to the same word Adam. And so I think they're the same species, but I also think Adam is created for a different commission. And he is created, and he has a breath of God breathed into him, which is not talked about in Genesis 1, that is going to unite with the soul and the body, which is a physical part of the creation. So the spirit of heaven is something that is special that Adam gets. And I have a great document on body, soul, and spirit if people want to know all about that. But staying with the question, this breathing in of the spirit or the breath of God into Adam is not the only difference between the Genesis 2 account and Genesis 1 account. And so you have, as another example, at that time, there's just Adam. And at some point later, Eve is created from a rib. But that's not what happens on day 6. So I tend to call them day 6 people. And they're created male and female. and created in numbers and told to spread around all over the earth. But Adam is put in the garden to be an agrarian. And the people of day 6 seem to be more like nomads and hunters and gatherers. Mm-hmm. And so you have this and many, many more differences. I've done shows just on the differences between the Genesis 1 account and Genesis 2, that the only way I can reconcile that, because I do not believe the Bible contradicts itself.
Right.
So if you've got so many different things at odds, something's got to be going on. And I think there's two creations. I think you have the original creation of day 6 man, and then after day 7, sometime after, you have a creation of Adam, and then sometime later, Eve. And I think this helps answer who Cain finds when he's ostracized at quite a young age, because it's just the first fruits that are being offered by these young agrarians that were taught by Adam. And then he's ostracized because he gets jealous and he kills Abel. I think everybody knows that story. But he goes to a place that's already named Nod. So, and it's east of Eden. It's in the Shinar region again. And he builds his first city named Hanok or Enoch, which is thought to be by people like David Rohl and others to be a transliteration of Uruk. And again, it's interesting that Uruk is in the same area Nimrod was building in Shinar his Tower of Babel. I don't think any of that is a coincidence, but I'm going to stay on track here because that's a great rabbit hole to go down. But the question's not about that. And so he goes to the land of Nod. It has a name, and he builds a city. He builds a city for who? And he takes a wife from who? And then he has a son. And you get all of these details, and who is the mark intended to protect him from? Now, he does live to be a long age, and it might be thinking, well, maybe 50 or 100 years down the road, you know, the descendants of Adam and Eve, as they produce more offspring, may hunt me down, but the world's a big place, so I'm not sure that makes any sense. And Seth is born sometime afterwards. And then sometime afterwards, like 130 years after Seth is born, then other siblings are born, brothers and sisters of Seth. So where does this female come from? Doesn't seem to make any sense. So I think all of that starts to answer questions when you start to say, if the and from my premise, the Bible does not contradict itself. So that means we just need to look at the details and say, what is this really saying? And I think that's what it's telling us, is these two different creations.
So since I'm going to get to Ben's question next, he wanted to add an extra question, which I feel like you probably do. You were going to be at the End Times convention with Zen Garcia and the rest. So Ben's asked if you were aware of Zen Garcia's Adamite definition or description.
You know, I'm sure he and I did a show on that together, but I think what we're the same on is that we do believe that there was more people. There was people created in day 6, and then you have Adam and Eve that are created sometime afterwards. So I don't quite recall all the different things Zen had talked about, but I do believe he has an expanded version on that, yes.
From what I've heard from him, which isn't a lot yet, we've only done about 3 recordings together, but it sounds very similar. So Ben's question that he asked on the Super Chat was, Jared, when it comes to the Antichrist, Jared Kushner or Prince William, are they possible Antichrists? A former Mason and friend to Ben's, his words, is Joy Pugh, and she says that she believes it's Prince William. Do you have any? Do you even do that where you think, oh, this is going to be the Antichrist, that's going to be the Antichrist? And I have one more question to add to that. Do you think that it will be a mockery to Jesus, and he will also be 33 years old?
Well, everything they do is a counterfeit. So that may very well be an age thing to keep in mind. Although I don't think that is, necessarily required. But it would make sense that they would use, he would be 33 years old when he comes to power. So I like to be careful on the Antichrist. I do believe that in making specific predictions, typically people have been wrong when they do that, and we won't know who the true Antichrist is until he signs or helps negotiate the covenant of death in Daniel 9:27. That's annulled as in Isaiah, which is that river that's talked about in Revelation at the time Judea flees because of the abomination. But I will say this, though, the royal bloodlines want to put forward an Antichrist, and they have the pedigrees to do it. So when I look at William, if we're in the generation and that is going to have Antichrist, one would have to include him as a possible candidate. I'd also would include the Bourbon family, who currently hold the King of Jerusalem title, which is another key part because they intermixed King Saul of the Benjamite bloodlines into their scioning of bloodlines, as with the Davidic bloodlines. And they're going to have to show a pedigree, whoever Antichrist is going to be, back to David and King Saul, because Antichrist is likely going to crown himself the King of Jerusalem at the abomination. So I do think that we want to keep some people in mind, but I also know that in their writings they keep at least 3 Antichrists ready to go at all times. And we also know that Jesus has prophesied that there would be more than one Antichrist. There'd be many Antichrists. And we also know that if Antichrist is going to counterfeit everything, he needs to counterfeit Armageddon.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So there has to be one that he can claim to be a false Christ so that he can be the true Christ and deceive everybody and bring in the age of peace. That's the Gog War and the Joel 1 and 2 war and the Revelation 9 war. It's all describing this war that happens just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And it's interesting when you take Gog in the Greek language back to the original meaning for Greek. It's also not only as we understand it as a name of a descendant of Japheth, an offspring of Japheth that migrates to the Turkey-Scythia region, but it is also an allegory for Antichrist as it's defined in Greek. And one wonders whether or not that imagery with Gog and Magog, and I also think that's an alliance of nations, so don't get too far down the road. And Gog and Magog were offspring of Iapetus and or Poseidon out of the Greek mythology. So one wonders whether or not that is all connected with that, setting up that counterfeit Antichrist for the true Antichrist to say, hey, we've defeated him and I'm going to bring in this new Atlantis now. So I think we need to keep that in mind, and that there are bloodlines all around the world that want to establish their Antichrist. And this includes, out of the Arab bloodlines and out of the Shia religion of Muslims, where they want the Mahdi, or the new Buddha coming out of India. But understand, all of these bloodlines and all of these traditions around the world have this same belief that Antichrist is going to come from their line, and there's a strong feeling within the secret society community as well that you're going to have a Jacobite as being the Antichrist figure and coming through the Stuart bloodline. So I think we're at a point where we need to be still very, very open to who Antichrist is going to be, but understand, to deceive the people of Judah who are living in the covenant land today, this Antichrist figure is going to have some form of genealogy, falsified or otherwise, that takes them back to at least David's bloodline to deceive the Jewish people. Otherwise, they're not going to accept him as the Messiah.
I agree with the fake Armageddon just from seeing it in movies, that they and from hearing Barbara Marx Hubbard say it herself, that she'll push the pale horse of death. Okay, so White Space Marines asked a really good and commonly asked question that I think is worth addressing about the name of God. Jesus said that we should call the true God Father, but some use lots of different names that I can't say them all. What is the real Father's name, and does it matter? Do we have to call God by any particular name for him to hear us?
Yeah, I'm certainly not into the legalism of that. I think God is fine, and but if you want to call him Yahweh, or if you want to call him Elohim, I think that's fine too. But I wouldn't get into the legalism. But what I like to do is I like to go back and again try and place everything around what Jesus said. And when Jesus was talking about God, he was talking about his Father. And he instructed us to pray to our Father in heaven. So if you really want to get kind of legalistic on it, then that would probably be the term you should call God as Father.
Okay, that's it. Perfect. So Josh asks, how will the Great Deception go? Will it be aliens, a race of people from Hollow Earth, or something else? And he also, I'm going to add to this, he also asked, are you a pre, mid, or post tribulation rapture person, or how would you explain the rapture? So first is, how will the Great Deception happen? Aliens, race of people from Hollow Earth, or something else? And is it going to be a pre, mid, or post tribulation rapture?
Yeah, very, very good questions. And the Great Deception is more than one thing. It is a number of things that are going to come all at the same time. So, and what I mean by that is, I think when you have an alien deception, that helps promote world government, especially when they introduce these aliens and they tell you that there are all of these different species around the universe, as in Star Wars, fighting against the dark lords of the universe that they call the God of the Bible. So I think that's a significant revelation that they're going to put forward that's going to help blend the world into the open arms and welcoming open arms of the globalists. And you notice in all of those science fiction movies that they're brainwashing people with, they all have that Babel religion, or an Eastern religion. That's the ancient Enochian mysticism that is going to be part of, will be the Babel religion of the end time that umbrellas all of the religions of the world. So they bring all of the polytheist religions home and still let them do vernacular rituals because they're all praying to the same God, so to speak, and to Satan at the top. So I think I think when we look at what that Great Deception is, that's going to be part of it. And that also opens up this avenue to bring down Christianity. And what they're going to do to bring down Christianity, and you could call this a Great Deception as well, is that they're going to say, and then they're going to bring out so-called evidence and genealogies to do two things. One is they're going to say that Jesus did not die on the cross and that he was not resurrected. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way you can destroy Christianity. As Paul said, our whole faith balances on that single doctrine that is true. And so they're going to hit Christianity right where the weak are not prepared. And then they're going to say he was just a prophet like Mohammed, like Confucius, like Hermes, like Buddha, sent to humankind along the way to help us evolve into godhood. So they're going to fold the ashes of Christianity into polytheism. And then they're going to tell you things like the religion that Moses brings back from Egypt was learned in Heliopolis. And this is the religion that was instituted by Aaron and Moses, and it went rogue at the time of the monarchy from polytheism into monotheism to create a better story and a greater sort of elevation of the monarchy in that story, and it went rogue, and that they're just bringing the religion home. Now you would have Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, which binds their religion to Moses, back into the fold as they do all of these other deceptions. So there's going to be a lot of deceptions, but to me, the great deception is going to be that they'll say and provide false evidence that Jesus actually did not die. He actually lived, but he's just part of this whole original religion, and monotheism is a rogue religion, and we're going to be, marshaled to the sidelines. And what they're going to do is we're also going to see a false resurrection of Antichrist, because he's going to have to counterfeit what Jesus did. So, and I can go on and on and on. There's just all these different things that they're going to do to deceive us. That what is the great deception? I think all of it, because it's going to take all of that to bring it about. And only a stubborn few who understand Scripture and prophecy amongst the Christians are not going to be deceived. Israel will awaken. Judah will recognize what's going on with the abomination. But until that time, it's only Christians that are going to, true Christians who understand, who are not going to be deceived. And we know that the deceptions will be so great we can't imagine it, because Jesus tells us this. He actually says that even the elect will be deceived if that were possible, and he clearly says they will be deceived. So, how big is the deception? We don't know, but it is significant. So to the second question is, I am mid-trib to slightly after. And I don't like to make rapture one of those faith issues. I don't like it to divide Christians. I know a lot of people have a lot of understanding, and pre-trib is very, very popular. In my approach, so that people understand my approach in Scripture and prophecy, is, as I already talked about, it being linear. I already talked about centering everything around Jesus. I take the Bible literally and define all allegories within the Bible, which means you need to understand prehistory to understand things like Babylon and the 10 kings and what's going to happen in the end time. And I like to use all the verses, not just the convenient ones. And too many people leave out the inconvenient verses so that it doesn't take away from their preconceived or preconcluded version of how they want it to be. And then I place everything around what Jesus said and uses his chronology. And when I do that, that's where I arrive at just after the midpoint of the last 7 years, when people come out of Babylon, and then Babylon is destroyed by Antichrist in Revelation 17, but marked in Revelation 14. And it's the same prophecy as Jeremiah 51. So that's kind of how I get there. It's because I don't have a preconceived idea when I approach this. I let the Bible, with putting all the Scripture together, let it tell itself. And that's what it leads to me. And I have a 50-page document on all the various rapture narratives, and I have lots of individual commentaries on the thief of the night. And all I'm trying to do is underline is all of those, when you put those together, align and do not contradict themselves. What I find when I try and do that for a pre-trib or a post-trib, I get contradictions that I can't resolve. And the last person I want to contradict is Jesus, and he gives the clear timing after the abomination in his chronology. And a lot of people use misdirection by saying the elect isn't the Christians. Well, the elect is used for Christians all throughout the Bible. And it actually, as you take that back to Greek, it actually means converted Christians that Jesus is talking to. But a lot of people say he was just talking to the people of Judah at that time. But he's educating the disciples who are going to start the church when Jesus is gone. And Israel and Judah will be part of Jesus' coming when you factor in the second Exodus prophecies, which also line up after the midpoint as part of the days of his coming that Luke talks about, not days of his coming. So he's coming for rapture, he's coming for Exodus, and he's also coming for Armageddon. And you also have a sequence of the resurrections that all line up to that, which brings you to the point of the midpoint again, because you have Ezekiel 37 with the dry bones being risen, so that Israel is going to be accounted for. Plus you have, as you get into the teen verses in Ezekiel 37, you have the second Exodus prophecies of the two staffs coming together. And what is going on here is you have visible Judah is going to be brought in Exodus to meet up with Judah in the wilderness that flees from the abomination, and as is recorded in Revelation 12, it also says there's 3.5 years left. And awakened lost Israel will also be led in Exodus, and Israel will wake up before that and understand and remember who they are, and they're called by God in that awakening, awaiting for Jesus to come to lead them in second Exodus. And it also lines up with those who do not take the mark of the beast and are beheaded will be risen in another resurrection that happens at the start of the millennium. So you have to follow the resurrection process and align that up with Jesus coming. And again, everything just sort of falls into place if you take the time to do that. And I'm not saying that isn't a lot of work, because believe me, it's years and years and years and years and years to be able to do that. So what I would tell people, though, to finish on is that let's not make this a wedge issue. I hope and I pray it's pre-trib, because who would want to go through the tribulation, any of it? But if it isn't, we need to be ready so that we're not deceived.
Yep.
And I have a full chapter in my book devoted to this, and that is going to work against us if it doesn't happen when the pre-trib people say it's going to happen. And it also explains, in terms of the resurrection process, in aspects of Revelation where you have the first fruits are going to be raised first. So you have the 24 elders, and then in Revelation 6 you have the martyrs. These are the first fruits. The 144,000 are also first fruits, and they finish up at the midpoint. You have the two witnesses, which are also part of the first fruits. And you have these martyrs that are raised as part of the first fruits in Revelation 6, told to be patient, so that the rest of those being martyred, those of us who are here and who reject the Babylon, New World Order, and rising Antichrist, who reject that, will be persecuted, hunted down, and slaughtered up to the midpoint of the last 7 years. And that is who is pictured in Revelation 7. And then comes the Antichrist genocide against the people who refuse to worship him, Satan, or take the mark of the beast, which is the last 3.5 years. So I don't want to overkill the point, but did it give people a good reason of how I arrive at my position on it?
I think it's very good discussion, because I've watched good information that says that there's pre-tribulation before I even knew that could be a possibility. So the great thing is I was already planning to be a part of the tribulation anyway. And I heard that and I was like, well, that'd be cool. But I didn't say, well, I'm going to go with that because I prefer it. I was like, well,
Yeah.
we might not be. I've heard some good information that pointed that way for me. But of course, you've done so much work that I would look at your stuff with a completely open mind and say, I need to be ready for this myself.
Yeah, that's the big point. I mean, everybody says they base their position on Scripture, and they do. Mm-hmm. But with the points that I have in my approach, and also as part of that approach is I apply all prophecies to Judah, and all prophecies to lost Israel as called Israel or Jacob so that you don't confuse those two prophecies in the end time, those two peoples, as to what happens, or have that confused with the Christian church. Otherwise, everything starts to get muddled. But with my approach is, even if somebody comes along and says, here's a verse, how do you fit that in? It either fits in, or I have to readjust everything to make sure that things fit in, because I do not ignore inconvenient passages.
Right. I will add one more thing. One thing I've heard that I hope for, but may not be possible, is that if we do have to go through the tribulation, maybe right before that awful, painful death, we'll get raptured. Just not just all at once, but maybe even before we go through the pain of the death that we might have to endure.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons why I don't believe that we're going to be that far beyond the midpoint is the wrath bowls start to pour out after Antichrist takes power. So probably not right at the 3.5 point, but we are going to be saved from that wrath, right?
Right.
And the wrath isn't before that. That's when the wrath bowls start and leads and finishes with the day of the Lord, or the Lord's wrath. And so the reason why I think there's a nice firm, another reason why I think why there's a nice firm separation point there is because those who from that point on who are killed for not worshiping Satan or Antichrist or taking the mark of the beast, they have another resurrection, a separate resurrection at the beginning of the millennium. And they rule with Jesus for throughout the millennium in Revelation 20. Mm-hmm. So again, I think that sort of everything just sort of points in that direction. You know, particularly when you get into the trumpets and you get into the Feast of Trumpets, the Thief of the Night, the signs, in signs, in Second Exodus, everything just comes together, and it's amazing how it keeps the same timeline.
I'm going to remind people with a lot of questions, because we don't have much more time for quite a few more questions, so I may not hit them all. But you guys are asking really great questions that continue on with this topic. I have pinned the website for Gary Wayne at the very top of the chat. Please click it and utilize it. He will help you with documents of stuff of research that he's done. He'll help you look at it. He'll get it to you, whatever. He's done it on all these different subjects and the book that he's written. However, he'll get that to you. Or somehow we'll get that to you. I know that he obviously answers his messages because he talks to me. So there's so much we could talk about and continue to go on. And if you wanted to add more on your website or how you address that, Gary, I mean, you know that better than I do.
Yeah, so on the website, go to genesis6conspiracy.com, the number 6conspiracy.com, and on there's a location to contact me with an email. So contact me through that email site. That's a great way of getting a hold of me. If you ask for a topic on a document, if I've got it, I'll send it to you. Anything I say I have a document on, I have, but name it by subject area so I know which one you're talking about. I do a lot of shows and people will say, you know, you did a show with this person, and can you send me those documents? And, you know, I do three or four shows a week, and I don't remember all the ones that I throw out when I'm doing a 2-hour show or whatever. So, yeah, be specific on that. You can also get a hold of me through Facebook on my timeline. If you post on there, everybody's welcome to do that. You post a question, I'll get back to you, or send me a message on Messenger, or through Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. So if you got a question or requesting some information, I will definitely get back to you.
And I have put all of those in the description box of this video. They're all on the website, though. If you just go straight to the website, you can get to the Twitter, you can get to the Facebook, you can get to all that.
Yes.
I do want to ask this question. I think it's a good question because most of us don't live in a third world country, but Gabriel does. And Gabriel says, what do you think is going to be the impact on third world countries where 4G isn't even evenly distributed? How will they infiltrate these places?
Well, I think what we're seeing with this technology is that in a lot of cases, let me back up a step. So we got the whole world at different levels. And some of the countries that came along and put in technology actually quantum leaped over countries that had put in the original systems. And I think that's going to continue to happen. So when we get through into that whole system, I expect most of the world will be ramping up to be able to do that. And I think that will be part of the promises that the New World Order and Babylon promises and then delivers and funds, because they want the whole world connected. They want a Borg mentality. They want access to you, and they want to be able to link you in and do all of the horrible things that they intend to do. So I think they're prepared to do that for the nations that aren't up to speed. But we need to hold open that perhaps not all places in the world will have complete access. There may be pockets, because Revelations is quite clear that the punishment for taking the mark is going to the lake of fire. But even if you don't take the mark and you worship Satan or Antichrist, you're still going to go to the lake of the fire. So I don't know whether that means that some people around the world just won't be connected because of that, but are still worshiping the system and the Antichrist and Satan. But there's a possibility for that. But the goal is that if they're going to offer godhood, they need to have you connected so that they can give you new bodies or nanobots or implants or whatever it is to extend your life so that you can be an immortal, so to speak, in the physical world. And they need to give you access to knowledge, because in polytheism, the two pillars of godhood is all knowledge and immortality. And so the only way they can offer that is to provide access and that connection. Now, I don't believe they want everybody connected. They want to reduce the population. And so there'll be people that they consider mundane who don't deserve to be part of the New Age. Even if you believe in them, they'll probably still persecute you and get rid of you, because that's what they do. They create genocides. So there's that possibility as well.
Is it possible that you could accept the mark or be implanted, as Greg is asking right now? What if you're implanted without knowing it? Is it even possible, though, when you get to this serious of a situation, that could happen without your knowledge?
No,
As a saved Christian?
You're going to know. And I also believe that you're going to swear a loyalty to Antichrist and to Satan, just as the secret societies swear on oaths. This is their religion and their system. Right. And so I think there's going to be both that. And I'm not as concerned about minor implants now. I mean, whatever is coming for the mark of the beast is going to be so beyond the primitive stuff that, they're putting in today. I mean, this is building towards it, but I think it's the super linked chip down or mark that you need to be aware of. And you're going to know that is what you're going to be taking on. And it happens after the abomination. So clearly you've got a time frame to say, let's not be accepting anything, right? Yeah. And again, it's those who take or accept the mark. So I think all will know. I don't think there'll be anything unclear about it.
And I've wondered that myself, because I've there's so many people saying, well, we've already accepted using the cell phone, so we might as well have already accepted the mark, or we're already doing it. We're already in step with technology. And I don't think that's true, because the more research I have done, the more I think, well, I know that I haven't gotten to a point where I'm controlled, because I still have a love and faith in the Lord that you're not going to have with that mark. And like you said, an oath here's the difference. When people accept the mark, is because they love the world more than Jesus. They love their life more than the Lord. They're going to want to live forever, or they're afraid to die, or they're afraid for their children to die. And we don't want our children to die, and we don't want to die unless we don't understand that we all die. We will all die. And if we want to have immortality on earth, then we're doing it in the way that Satan wants it to be done, and not in the way that Jesus wants to be done. And I think that's how you know. If you're trying to survive, over the top survive, if you're going to go, virus scare, I need a vaccine, you're kind of on your way there. Or, God love my saints, my friends and saints. I call them the saints because they're not my saints, they're the saints of the Lord. But I love my friends and all the people who love Jesus Christ, because we get a little nervous and anxious sometimes, and then I have to remind myself, and if they're willing to listen, I said, how long do you want to live through this? Like, how long do you want to be
Yeah.
here after a famine happens or a disease
Yeah.
spreads? Do you want to be the last person walking
Yeah.
around on Earth, or should we just go with it?
Yeah. So I think, but in terms of how it's being introduced, that's part of the subtle nature in terms of deceiving people sort of one step at a time. But for those who are awake and those who understand prophecy, I mean, we know where the cutoff line is. And, innocent people aren't going to be sent to the lake of fire. So, let's say they grabbed you, kept you alive,
Right.
forced you against your will,
Right.
and put it into you. I mean, God knows everything that's going on. So, I mean, I wouldn't worry so much about that, and I wouldn't be concerned about being deceived that it'll happen without your knowing it. But I think it's good as what you're talking about to have that healthy skepticism on every step of the way in terms of what you are going to do and what you're not going to do, but also know where that cutoff line is.
Okay, so Hubu Jones asks, will the 10 kings be human?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I think there might be a few strongmen with low-level bloodlines in there, but I do believe at least they're going to be the descendants of the Rephaim after the flood. And the reason why I say that is both before the flood and after the flood, the Nephilim before, the Rephaim afterwards, they usurped all of the kingships of the world. And they set up their feudal system and organizational structure that enslaved humans ever since. And all the elite classes and the nobility are all the larger family of the original bloodlines. And so when we look at whether it's Babylon, that's one of the empires that is used in the beast nations or the prophecies of Daniel, and as they come back into play in Revelation 13 and 17, or it is Persia, or it's Greece. These are all Rephaim descended dynasties. And these are the dynasties that set up the bloodlines in Europe and all around the world. These are the same people who have control. So I think there's a good possibility that they're going to be the ones who are the 10 kings. I do leave open to the possibility that these 10 kings would be Nephilim or Rephaim, either recreated or somehow survived. I mean, and the only reason why I say that is that when you look closely at Daniel 2, you have the old Roman Empire, which are the legs, and then you have the feet, and they're partly of iron and partly of clay, and there's 5 toes on each foot. And that's almost suggesting a bit of a split. And we don't know whether that means there's 2 halves to the end time world empire, or there's 2 different types of beings that are involved with this. What we do know is the empire doesn't mix very well because iron doesn't mix with clay, but it will set up this 10 king empire so that it can hand its power over to the Antichrist. Now, what's interesting is you get into that and you understand that these metallic empires that are described in Daniel 2 are the Rephaim dynasties that I've been talking about, that this is an extension thereof. And then in Daniel 2:43, you have this very, very odd verse that says these descendants or these kings are going to mix with the seed of humans.
Okay.
And that's a very, very odd statement. So does that mean that they're going to intermix with some human rulers, and the rest will be the hybrid humans that are the descendants of the Rephaim, or will there be actually purebred Rephaim that are going to be mixing with humans in Daniel 2:43? So it's a good question. I tend to lean on mostly that it's going to be the royal families that are going to step up around the world, because you have like the Lees already in power with Xi, which goes back to the Shah dynasty, XIA, and XIA and XI is in Xi. trying to think of his next name. But anyways, President Xi in China right now, he is part of that Li dynasty that comes from the dragon creators, just as there was a Li in there before him, and all of the monarchies of the Chinese dynasty were from the Shah dynasty. So you have all of the southeast bloodlines that are basically propagated from the Chinese, and you have the Yamamoto bloodline, which again I think goes back to the Chinese bloodlines. But you've got all of the families in South America, Central America. Those families didn't go away, even though the Spanish beheaded or killed the existing king. Within a decade of taking over South America and Central America, both the Spanish and the Portuguese reinstated those family bloodlines with all of their nobility and intermixed with them and intermarried with them. So I think these bloodlines are still in place all around the world. And I think that's likely who's going to make up these 10 kings. But that little verse in Daniel 2:43 always makes me not get too far in front of and leaving out the possibility that there might be actually real Rephaim that are pure blood Rephaim giants that are going to be part of those 10 kings. And they could be, no, I'm not going to go there. I was going to say it might have something to do with the alien deception as well, but that's way too, there's not enough there for me to make a good solid connection there.
Okay. You know, I have, if you can, I know we only have 5 minutes for the 90 minutes, but there are two people that have not been able to have their question asked, and they only asked one question each. So do you mind if we just go through those last two?
We'll do.
Christian Layton asked about the Starbucks logo. If you're aware if that's somebody called Melusine, forgive me guys, I don't know these names, or Semi Ramus, and what do you know about that?
Well, yes and yes. So, and you know, these are also, as you go back into the matriarchal bloodlines and to mermaids and things, they're all sort of interconnected into that mythology. And so, you know, Semiramis is connected to both Greek mythology and to Tammuz in Sumerian mythology and as being post-diluvian. And they're also connected to mermaids, and they're also connected to the wives of the fallen angels in the book of Enoch. So the quick answer, and because we're kind of short of time, I won't go through all of it, but get a hold of me if you want a real detailed answer on that. I'll provide that for you. But it's an interesting connection as you peel back the onion on all these things. And that is the iconology that Starbucks is representing. So again, a lot of these oligarchic left-wing corporations, which are going to be a major part of the end time, will represent their politics and their belief systems within their iconology.
I want those documents. I'm so interested in the mermaid aspect. Okay, so Ralph says this, and then he wants to, it just says agree or not. Satan wants to go back to the time before Adam with his idea of hierarchy, and his goal is now an endless delay of divine judgment. Would you agree or not?
Don't think I understood that. Could you read that to me again?
Satan wants to go back to the time before Adam with his idea of hierarchy, and now his goal is an endless delay of the divine judgment. Would you agree or not?
Yes. Yes, because he knows that he's going to the lake of fire after he goes to the abyss. So he's in no hurry to get to the end of the story. He obviously didn't recognize when he was trying to bring down humankind, because the initial, in terms of what was going to happen, because he was initially trying to prevent humankind from achieving our destiny to be raised up as to be like angels, as adopted by Jesus, as Hebrews, the book of Hebrews talks about, and to actually judge angels. And the reason why I know that in the beginning that he didn't anticipate everything that was going on, he actually thought he could have humankind destroyed and go back to that realm before the age of Adam, is because he was active in entering Judas to help Judas betray Jesus. And had he known about the resurrection, where we will be adopted to be sons of God and brothers of Jesus, even though we have human fathers, with our resurrection, he would not have permitted, nor would the other angels have permitted, Jesus to be crucified. And that comes in 1 Corinthians, if people are familiar with that verse. So obviously they didn't know, otherwise they wouldn't have crucified Jesus. So he had no idea that was coming, but until that point, he knew that but he wanted to bring things back to the original state in terms of where he had control and there wasn't humans around. But he had rebelled at that point anyway, so he's not trying to be accepted by God. He wants a separate realm, as Isaiah 14 talks about. Now, in terms of delaying the end time, I'm sure he's in no hurry to bring it about. Although the forces that he has deceived and the fallen angels have deceived, the humans and the hybrid humans that are running the world, they are wanting to bring this about so that they can live in a world governed by Satan and the rebellious fallen angels and away from God. So they've lied to the humans and their human hybrid offspring throughout the generations. So they're in a hurry to bring it about, and they're working feverishly to bring it about so they can have that rendezvous with destiny. But I assure you, Satan and the fallen angels aren't, because they know they're going to the lake of fire. And they go to the lake of fire, as Matthew talks about, at the end of Armageddon. Satan, on the other hand, spends his time in the abyss for 1,000 years, escapes, causes another Armageddon kind of war, and then is sent to the lake of fire. So they're in no hurry to get there, but the people who live in this physical world, they want to get there in a hurry. Now, having said that, they're not in control of the timetable. Never were. Mm-hmm. The end time will not happen until the restrainer is removed.
Okay, that's all the questions we're going to take tonight, because even if I wanted to ask more, which I do, of course, I know that we've got to have time limits or we get exhausted. But what I would like to do, one last thing, if you want or are willing, I like to pray with my people before I finish a lot of my live shows, unless it's just a quick one. So I always offer for the guest to pray, or I can pray. What would you like to do?
What would you like me to do?
If you are comfortable praying, I'll let you go for it, because I do it a lot, but I don't mind it. I love it, but it's nice to have a new voice doing the prayer.
Then I will lead us in prayer to close out the show.
Thanks so much.
Father in heaven, we thank you for permitting us to get together and communicate and to exchange ideas and to glorify you and to glorify Jesus and to prepare Christians and to just come together in your word and your understanding so that we can strengthen our faith and to hopefully arm and prepare people who are listening tonight to be able to go out and maybe make a small difference in the world and influence in a very positive and gentle way others who may not be quite ready yet to hear some of the things that we're talking about, but plant seeds so that all the names that were written in the name of the book before creation are more easily fulfilled in. So we thank you for permitting us to have this show and that it wasn't interrupted and things came off fine. And we thank you for helping us to be able to ask good questions and to hopefully have made some good responses in the understanding of what you have provided us for information so that all of this can happen. So I want to close out this show and saying thank you, Lord, for being with us tonight. And we pray all of these things in the name of our Redeemer and Savior, the Word Jesus, who sits at your right-hand side and testifies to you for us and for all of the saints, and also in the name of the Holy Spirit, in your great and holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. And I'm sure if I ask you if you'll come back, you'll say yes. So will you come back sometime?
I will. Just a matter of setting up dates.
Good, because this is fun and people love it, and we're all learning. And several of us have your book now. Somebody in there said they're almost done with it. Some of us are just beginning. So we appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we look forward to learning more. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right, I'm going to let you go. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye. Okay, Saints, I'm going to finish you off. Not finish you off. I love you guys. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and just play a song while it ends and let you enjoy that, or go ahead and go if you want to go. But thanks so much for being here, you guys. Full armor. Let's just go out into the world and try to be a light of Jesus and bring more souls, because the Lord is long suffering and it's not over yet. So let's do that. Let's be a light for other people. Let's bring more souls to Jesus, because that's something we have the ability to do. So let's go save some souls. And with that, I'm going to play the song Get Saved. Good night. Peace and love of the Lord. Wow, that was so fun. All right, let's do it again soon. Bye, guys.
I used to think everything was a big mistake. Didn't care about a thing except making bank. Now my thoughts have changed, for goodness sake. Replace my hate with solid grace. Been faced with the guilt of my own reflection. Lost face down in the wrong direction. Sought forgiveness and redemption, brought by the King who bought my salvation. Stopped my search, found satisfaction. Trapped unaware of my sinful actions. Now I'm back on a mission, and what I'm asking, are you aware of the path you're traveling? Raised like a dead man out of the grave. I've been born again like a newborn babe. Praise to the King who made death a slave. He died, then he rose so we could get saved. Saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get
Christ
saved
from the raging waters like pararescue. Blessed dude, and I ain't even sneeze to say hi to what you do when you know your life is in life. Cause you keep on sinning like some atheist women. Live your life down in sickness like sick ward patients. Better turn your life around. God is losing his patience and it's tasteless. That sin is moving your feet. Cause sin is bad for your soul like candy's bad for your teeth. I don't want no cavities, only live for my majesty. Learn to call on him when the devil comes to battle me. Ain't no tragedies cause Christ is better. Cause the devil loosens your life like looseness sweaters. While you out chasing the cheddar, out chasing the girl. Cause you living for the world and you want diamonds and pearls. Let me tell you, dog, your soul's depraved. So you know what you need to do, dog. You need to get saved.
Saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get
we all
saved.
gotta get saved from ourselves in the flesh. Cause we're darker than our life, dog. Our life is a mess. Feeling the stress of every single day that we live in. We're on the right track, but we're constantly sinning. It's a given, God knows that we're going to do it. But you gotta give your life to him to get you through it. But instead of that, you find yourself out at the club, looking for love, sipping back on that bub, getting them hugs from the girls, they're showing you love. But the next day they singing, we don't want no scrubs. And that's usually how it goes when they ain't so tipsy. Last night you were pimping, but you ain't no pimp, G. And that's what's so funny, the world's view we live in. The Satan's way ain't a guaranteed or a given. I know you really feeling like you just got played. Just focus on Christ, dog, it's time to get saved.
Saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get saved from the great deception. Saved from yourself and your own intentions. Get made like a new creation. Now is the time for transformation. Get saved.